studying from the book of Job this evening. If you would turn in your Bibles there, the book of Job. Wonderful to see you all back here tonight. Appreciate your presence, the encouragement, the hospitality this afternoon, which I know takes enormous sacrifice, but it's well worth it. Thank you to the Huttos for opening your home to everybody. Thank you for making my pants tighter tonight. But it was worth it. It was worth it. There's sacrifices to go around. And certainly time will elude us if we were to tally up all the reasons that we are blessed to be here. We've already been led in a number of very thought-provoking songs by Graham. Appreciate his effort so much. We've sung our hearts out. We've prayed to God, and how about we just jump into doing a study of God's Word. My name is Job, and I come from a land called Uz. I was blameless and an upright man who feared God, and this was according to the testimony of God Himself. God blessed me beyond measure with an abundance of flocks and herds, and I had a wife, 7 sons, and 3 daughters. I cared greatly about my standing before God, but I also cared about the spiritual welfare of my children. If for even the possibility that any of my children had sinned, I would regularly have them consecrated and offer burnt offerings on their behalf. But something happened to me that at the time I was not aware of, and I could not possibly have been aware of what was happening. See, the hosts of heaven presented themselves before God, and Satan also stood among them. Satan tried to convince God that the depth of my faith was proportionate only to the abundant blessings God had given me. And Satan challenged God to take everything away from me. All my wealth, all my prosperity, and that in doing so I would curse God to His face. I did not know that this was happening in the heavenly places. But God accepted this challenge and allowed Satan to remove these things from me. Well, have you ever had one of those days where you go to the doctor for a simple routine checkup, only for him to discover a mole or a lump, something serious that you had no idea was there, and as you leave that doctor's office, your entire world is turned upside down? Or maybe you were at work or you were relaxing at home and you get a phone call that just rocks your world, and what seemed like just an ordinary day is now anything but. That's what happened to me. It seemed like a normal day. But then news started coming in that raiders and thieves were plundering my flocks and striking down my servants who were guarding them. Then fire rained down from heaven and consumed all my sheep. But these tragedies, as awful as they were, paled in comparison to what happened next. See, a great wind struck the home where all 10 of my children were gathered for a feast, and it killed every single one of them. At the blink of an eye, I lost everything. I was in anguish. I tore my robe, shaved my head, and I fell to the ground in utter shock. It all seemed absurd, meaningless, and undeserved. But you know what? While I did enjoy my wealth, and I certainly loved my children beyond measure, none of that defined my relationship with God. As the Apostle Paul would later say in Philippians 3 and verse 8, I count all things to be lost in view of the surpassing value of knowing the Lord. Sure, I had acquired wealth, but the most precious thing I had, the thing that could never be taken away, was knowing God and being personally known by Him. And so despite the utter shock of all that had occurred, despite that intense sorrow that I was feeling, it compelled me to do the same thing as those moments of joy. It forced me into the immediate presence of God. The only thing that made sense to do, having been brought so low, was to look up. And so I fell to the ground and I worshiped my Lord. After all, I came naked from my mother's womb. I would return naked. The Lord gave and the Lord took away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Well, Satan wasn't done accusing me. Again, I didn't know any of this was going on. But despite being proved wrong before, Satan appeared once again before God, a second time, to incite me against him. And this time, or incite him against me, this time Satan claimed that taking away a man's possessions will never break a man so much as taking away his personal health. And the Lord once again accepts Satan's challenge, only commanding that whatever was done to me, my life should be spared. I had not even emotionally recovered from the loss of my wealth and my children when Satan smote me with sore boils throughout my entire body from head to toe. I was miserable. These sores ran with pus and got clogged with dirt and infested with worms. I had to take a potsherd just to scrape myself, but it only brought limited relief. At this moment, I was as low as a man could possibly be. I had lost everything of material value, and now my health was decaying before my very eyes. You know, so much attention has been given to my personal suffering throughout the centuries that it is easy to forget that I had a wife. And she was just as much a victim of this tragedy as I was. When I lost a family fortune, so did she. The loss of my 10 children was her loss. But now she is seen before her eyes, a despicable bag of rotting flesh, her husband's life seemingly draining away, and, well, this proved too much for her. And her faith just collapsed under the pressure of it all. And in her lack of faith, she began to resent my faith, saying, "Do you hold fast your integrity? Go ahead and curse God so you'll die." She just couldn't understand how I could cling with perfect devotion to a supposedly perfect God when reality was so far from perfect. To her, my steadfastness wasn't exemplary strength. To her, it was an act of cowardice, and she believed that I ought to challenge God for afflicting me, even if the consequences of doing so would cost me my life. Oh, how Satan must have smiled as he observed how the one closer to me than all others, and who should have encouraged me and offered me sympathy, could become so overwhelmed and so broken that she would utter such foolish words. I mean, it was one thing for me to lose my material possessions, one thing to lose my children and to lose my health, but one of the worst trials that we can endure is when those we're closest to, rather than lifting us up and strengthening our faith, conspire to destroy it. And Satan was using her as an instrument to do that very thing at that particular time. Curse God and die. You think your marriage is challenging? How'd you like to be married to a nugget like that? But one thing that I had to remember is that being a husband is a duty. A husband must be a leader, the voice of reason. And that, men, is our responsibility through the good times and the bad. For better or worse, for rich or poor, in sickness and in health, till death parts us. And if I allowed her collapse in faith to influence me, then I would be no different than my forefather Adam, who allowed Eve to negatively influence him into doubting God's use of his divine power. And that is what brought on all this pain and suffering I was experiencing in the first place. No. Despite what I was suffering, it was time to tell my wife something she may not have wanted to hear at the time, but that she needed to hear. I said to her, "You speak as one of the foolish women speak. Shall we indeed accept good from God and not accept adversity?" In other words, my wife at that time forgot what real faith is all about. That faith is like an axe that is prepared by the fire of the forge for the blows it must endure. That's how our faith is tempered for the trials of the future. A true trust in God is learning to walk with the Lord on a sustained basis, not just when everything is smooth sailing. It is a fickle faith to demand that only good things come in this life, and then to resent the idea that I should never experience bad things. We live in a fallen world. And to renounce God in this fallen world just because we're the recipients of adversity, that does not end human difficulties. It only compounds them. But at least I had my three friends with me: Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. When they heard what happened to me, they came to me like any true friends would. And for 7 days, they did not once leave my side. They empathized with me, weeping aloud, tearing their robes and sprinkling dust on their head to let me know that my suffering would be their suffering. I mean, just having them there with me for that first week as they sat with me in silence was a great comfort to me during this trial. But for anyone who has spent time with a suffering friend, you know just how hard it is to sit in silence and to watch them suffer without trying to provide any answers whatsoever. I mean, how do you grieve silently with a friend who has to rebuild his life piece by piece without any certainty of the outcome? It's human instinct to want to identify what went wrong, devise a solution and right or wrong to convince ourselves that we can best help our friend to eliminate the cause so that we can get back to normal as soon as possible. And that was the great temptation of my friends Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. They simply could not endure the mystery that was my suffering, and it caused them to jump to misguided conclusions about its cause. Now, all three of my friends pushed upon me the same underlying assumption. That assumption being that there is a universal principle of retribution that unconditionally governs our reality. All three propose that since God is just, the reason that people suffer must always be because they've done something wrong. Eliphaz put it this way. He said, "Remember now, who ever perished being innocent? Or where were the upright destroyed? According to what I've seen, those who plow iniquity and those who sow trouble harvest it." Bildad said, "If you're pure and upright, surely now he rouse himself for you and restore your righteous estate." And Zophar, who was the most negative of the three, said, "But the eyes of the wicked will fail, and there will be no escape for them, and their hope is to breathe their last." And they said a lot of other things along these same lines. I didn't deny the principle. Whatever a man sows, that he will also reap has been a divine truth since the beginning of time. In fact, that's why I was offering sacrifices for my children. if for the mere possibility that they had sinned and provoked God's wrath in the process, I wanted to take care of that. But does this principle of retribution explain everything? Are there not exceptions to the general rule? Not to my friends. For them, this was an either-or situation. In their estimation, either God is just and I'm not righteous, or I am righteous and therefore God is not just. In their eyes, one of these was going to have to go. And so, of course, their conclusion was that I must not be righteous, that I must be guilty of some kind of secret sin, though none of them could produce evidence of any. And despite this lack of evidence that I had done something to bring about all this suffering, they insisted that I repent. And so, what happened that in the midst of a horrible tragedy, what happened to my friends that it would cause them to go from comforting me to lecturing me? Why did they assume that they had it all figured out? I mean, they're acting like they just completed their first semester at Florida College. You can laugh. That's supposed to be funny. So you're like, should I laugh at this? Or am I going to get expelled from the college? I'm just kidding. But in reality, they became worthless physicians, sorry comforters, and those whose consolation turned to insults and torment. Well, let me tell you what was really happening behind the scenes. What was really happening is that Satan wasn't done with me. Satan was working me over through my wife, and now he was working me over through my friends. And it was breaking my spirit. It was causing me to be rash with my words. I was beginning to lose balance and not only question myself, but I was beginning to question God. See, from their point of view, my suffering could only be explained by either questioning God's character or questioning my character. And they weren't about to question God's character. And so to them, I must have done something wrong to provoke God's wrath. And as my spirit broke, what started happening is I began to defend against their accusations. And as I began to defend against their accusations, I started to unfortunately overstate my case. I agreed with this principle of retribution on the first surface, but I also believed myself to be undeserving of this suffering. So I began to question whether God could really be just. And I just knew that if I could make my case before Him personally, I'd be exonerated. I mean, surely God would see just how righteous and how undeserving of suffering I was. You see how clever Satan is? In all this dialogue between me and my three friends, Satan was there with his hidden agenda the entire time, subtly tempting me to doubt God. And in my defense, I found myself doing what is so common in these situations, overcompensating for this doubt by running to the opposite extreme, giving into my anxieties and allowing them to make me irrational. I became so fixated on my own innocence, it led to me becoming a little too self-assured regarding my righteousness, too critical of God's motives behind all this, and too boastful in my self-evaluation. And so my friends stopped talking to me. And when they did, brethren, it was at this point that wisdom came from a very unlikely place. There was a young man by the name of Elihu who'd been listening to all this back and forth between me and my friends, and since he was a lot younger than us, he initially held back from butting in. But as he listened to my friends accuse me of secret sin solely on the basis of false assumptions, and as he listened to me justify myself at the expense of God's honor, well, Elihu just couldn't be silent anymore. Elihu expected to hear greater wisdom from us than what he was hearing, and so what he did hear was a disappointment. Now, Elihu had the same assumption as me and my friends. He agreed that God is just. He also agrees that God operates the universe according to that justice. But in the dialogue between me and my friends, Elihu saw bias on both sides. And despite how young he was, he felt as if he needed to bring something fresh to the table that had not yet been considered. And that's why this young man spoke up. Now, Elihu didn't claim to understand why I was suffering, but he was certain that I was wrong for defending my own righteousness at the expense of God's justice. And rather than deduce this mystery to only one of two causes, Elihu reminded me that God is greater than man. God is greater than man. And that means His vision, His purposes, and His wisdom far transcends us all. And so Elihu drew a more sophisticated conclusion as to why some people suffer other than simply because of hidden sin in the past. Suffering is not necessarily proof of the wickedness of man, nor is it proof of God's arbitrariness or even an indication that He's our enemy. God may afflict suffering as a warning to help us to avoid sin in the future. Or God might allow pain and suffering in order to build a person's character. Or God might allow pain and suffering to teach people valuable lessons that they wouldn't otherwise learn. And so Elihu actually suggested something that neither me nor my friends had even considered, namely that the suffering of the righteous is not necessarily evidence of God's enmity. Sometimes it's evidence of His love for us. Sometimes it's a fine-tuning of our righteousness, not a preparation for destruction, but a protection from destruction. Suffering from God is not merely evidence of the executioner's whip, but of the surgeon's knife. It's not just a fire that leads to destruction. Sometimes it's a fire that leads to refinement toward righteousness. Suffering has the weird ability of awakening us to dimensions of God's reality and to the depths of our spiritual imperfection and need that we would never get if we didn't suffer. In other words, suffering, as unpleasant as it is, and as mysterious as it is, actually has the power to deepen our faith and our godliness. Ooh, Elihu, that guy dished out some surprising wisdom. Despite my righteousness, there was a sediment of imperfection in me. There was a pride in me that needed to be brought out and eliminated, and I needed to be sensitive to that. And had it not been for my personal suffering, that pride may have never shown itself. Because I had been overly optimistic and said things about God that were disrespectful. Oh, I was righteous, all right. I was righteous. But that does not mean that I was sinlessly perfect. As the psalmist would later said in Psalm 119:71, it is good for me that I was afflicted, that I may learn your statutes. You know, I contended with my friend's accusations, but I had no answer for Elihu. There was truth in what he said, and I needed to consider those truths. Well, as I was riding my emotional roller coaster, I challenged God. I said, "Oh, that I had one to hear me. Behold, here's my signature. Let the Almighty answer me, and the indictment which my adversary has written." I was hoping for an audience with God. But boy, did I end up getting way more than I bargained for. See, God did show up to answer me personally, and in a whirlwind, no less. And He said to me, "Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Now gird up your loins like a man, and I will ask you, and you instruct me." And it's at this point that the Creator of this entire universe took me on somewhat of a virtual tour of the wonders of His creation, and He put me on trial. He asked me all kinds of questions about the origin of the earth and its structure, the boundaries of the sea, the design of the heavenly bodies, and whether or not I knew how to control things like the weather. He asked me if I knew how to provide food for all animal life, the intricacies of their birthing patterns and their nesting patterns. He asked me all kinds of things like this, and of course, I didn't have a clue. But God did. His eye is on it all. And that was exactly His point. See, my friends and I made all kinds of assumptions about how God runs the universe according to justice, because in our foolishness, we thought we had a broad enough perspective about creation to make such assumptions. But God deconstructed those assumptions by reminding me of something that I should have already known. And that is that God's creation is awesome, it is massive, complicated, and mysterious. Creation is fine-tuned to such a degree that I couldn't even fathom. And yet, God is wise enough and He is powerful enough that He has His eyes on it all. But me? All I had to go on was what God chose to reveal to me, as well as the tiny horizon of my life experiences. And that means my outlook on things was severely limited. And folks, if I had neither the knowledge nor wisdom to understand the mystery that is God's creation, how could I ever have expected to understand the mystery that is suffering? God's point, though He didn't explicitly say it, was that my suffering may have looked like divine injustice, but I could never know that to be the case, seeing how unable I was to view things from a larger context. We human beings are a finite race. We don't even have the knowledge of how to run the world and everything in it, because we are all ignorant of 99.9% of its processes. So how can we be in any position to make an accusation of injustice against the cosmic creator of this universe? My response: behold, I am insignificant. What can I reply to you? I lay my hand on my mouth once I have spoken, and I will not answer even twice, and I will add nothing more. But God wasn't done with me. He pressed His case a bit further. And what he asked me in so many words is, Job, how about I just turn things over to you for a little while and let you micromanage the universe according to that strict sense of justice you seem to have? How about you just go ahead and sternly punish every single evil deed of every single person at every moment with exact precision? Well, of course I couldn't do that. I mean, carrying that out in a world as complicated as ours, it is never as black and white as my friends and I tried to make it. And that was precisely the point. And so it was then that God goes into detail about these two fantastic creatures, Behemoth and Leviathan. Well-known creatures from that day. Wonder, extraordinary strength, incredible power. Not intrinsically evil. I mean, God actually brags on these two quite a bit. Rather, what they served as were two great examples of the danger and the disorder that is planet Earth. See, this world is amazing, and it is full of abundant blessing and goodness and beauty, but we all know that this world isn't always safe, is it? In fact, this world can be rather unpredictable and dangerous, just like these two creatures. And the unfortunate reality for us all is that sometimes we human beings get caught up in those crosshairs. God never explained to me why I was personally suffering. He did not tell me about Satan's accusations against me. He didn't tell me that he was the one who authorized him to attack me or the reason for it. And God also didn't tell me that my personal history would be written up to encourage the faith of other believers until the end of the world. And He did not tell me that we live in an amazing world of mysterious complexity and wonder, and that I'm just going to have to be a victim of suffering until He decides to send His Son to return. There's so much He didn't tell me. He didn't tell me that soon after I went through all this, everything was going to be all right, and He would make it all right. But just because I was personally suffering did not put me in any position of wisdom to begin challenging the way that God chooses to run things. And so what I learned from God putting me on trial is that in absence of a reason why things happen the way that they do, I simply need to trust Him. You know, brethren, we are not going to force God to hold His breath by holding ours. You understand? Only a person too distracted by his own self-interest could ever allow the question of why we suffer to be a deal breaker with God. Fate demands so much more than that. My response: I know that you can do all things, and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. Who is this that hides counsel without knowledge? Therefore I have declared that which I did not understand, things too wonderful for me which I did not know. Hear now, and I will speak. I will ask you, and you instruct me. I have heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you. Therefore I retract, and I repent in dust and ashes. And because of my newfound humility and repentance, God restored my fortunes and my family twofold. My name is Job, and the record of my suffering has remained intact for the thousands of years that it has, in order to be a blessing to everyone who has suffered as I have and may not understand why. My suffering was not only an occasion for God to receive glory over Satan, but it became an occasion for God to deepen my insight and my trust and my godliness. And brethren, if we don't learn to develop faith toward God regarding those things that we do not understand, Satan will eventually snatch away what faith we do have. I did not know why God was allowing me to suffer as I did, but I knew the God I served, and that was enough for me. As for me, I know that my Redeemer lives, and at the last, He will take His stand on the earth. And as we complete the lesson with that, I just realized I made a huge mistake by not asking that the invitation song be "I Know That My Redeemer Lives." Graham, do you know that song? You don't? It's okay. We don't have to sing it. Or we can sing two invitation songs. But I'm going to let you decide. That's my fault. Brethren, I know that my Redeemer lives. And you know that your Redeemer lives. And you know what that means? It's all going to be okay. What a great day we have to look forward to for those of us that are Christians. What if you're not? Or what if you're not living faithfully? You want to feel those same goosebumps that everybody else just felt, thinking about one day being in heaven with God and all the trials and all the temptations and all the sufferings that remain on this earth, that they're going to be gone and they're not even going to be thought of later? Do you want to feel that intense excitement of what God has waiting for us? You can. You can feel it right now if you come forward and let it be known that you wish to obey the gospel. Or for those of us that maybe have some repenting to do, some confessing to do, some writing to do, maybe you need to come forward and make that known. I don't know. Only you do. All I know is that my Redeemer lives, and at the last, He will take His stand on the earth. And I want you to be right when He does. How can we help you? Come forward while we stand, while we sing.